A priest friend of mine from Ottawa was recently in the United Kingdom for 2 weeks of holidays, touring around various places. And one of the things that Father Allen enjoys to do is to find local coffee houses and shops to be able to feed his caffeine addiction. And one day as he was wandering through the streets of London, he passed a coffee shop that had a large sign that read, Redemption Roasters. He was intrigued by the title of the sign and went in to see what it was all about. To his surprise, it was more than just a coffee house that served what he described as one of the best cups of coffee that he had ever had. But moreover than the great coffee, he was touched by the business philosophy of the company. The company began about 20 years ago by two young university students named Ted and Max. They started a coffee house and then a few years later began roasting their own coffee beans. And as word of their success began to spread, one day they received a call from the London Ministry of Justice. And the Ministry of Justice approached them of whether they would be interested in entering into a partnership with them and one of the local jails. The idea behind the project was to set up a roastery in one of the local jails and then to be able to train the inmates in the art of coffee roasting and making. The hope was that when the inmates were released after serving their time, they would have a job then waiting for them on the other side. This would give them not only meaningful employment as they got back on their feet, but it was also hoped that it would reduce the rates of reoffending. It seemed to be a great fit between Max and Ted and the inmates. And so they began. They began teaching the inmates about the art of coffee and coffee roasting. And months later, they hired their first inmate that had been released. And over the past 10 years or so, they have hired a number of former inmates to serve in their coffee shops. Hence the title of their stores, Redemptive Roastery. It was a sign of hope for these inmates, that it was possible to have a second chance and a new beginning. And with that second chance and new beginning, there was hope for them to have a better life. I think in many ways the philosophy and the lived experience behind Redemption Roasters is at the heart of the gospel passage that we have just heard this evening from St. John. In tonight's gospel, we hear of one of the famous I am sayings that is only found in the Gospel of St. John. And tonight we hear Jesus declare that I am the true vine and you are the branches. And as he uses this imagery of the vine and branches, he speaks about the intimate and necessary connection between the two and how the branches need to remain, need to stay connected, attached to the vine if they are going to have life and be able to produce fruit. Not only do these branches need to stay connected, but at various times they also then need to be pruned so that what is old and dead can be transformed into what is going to be new, alive, and fruitful. The old must give way to the new, and this is what the art of pruning is all about. In many ways, this art of pruning is what the philosophy of Redemption Roasters is all about. It is about pruning away the old, hardened way of life of these past criminals and giving to them a new way of life and new skills to continue on the journey. And I think ultimately, this idea of pruning and newness of life is at the heart of what we have been celebrating throughout these past weeks as an Easter people, and in fact is at the heart of what the spiritual journey is all about. It is about that desire to remain connected to God, who is our way, our truth, and our life. It is about recognizing that it is only by having him at the center and the heart of our lives are we able to truly have life in abundance, and to be able to bear fruit as his witnesses and his disciples. But in order for this to happen, like branches, we need to stay connected to the vine. And who is the vine but God himself? And how is it that we stay connected to God? How is it we stay connected to this true vine? And it is through our spiritual disciplines and practices that are what allows us to stay connected, what it is that allows us to receive that spiritual nurture and nourishment that we need so that we can be fully human, fully alive. And so as we spend time each and every day in daily prayer, as we spend time reading and reflecting upon the scriptures, as we spend time celebrating the sacraments, especially that of Eucharist and reconciliation, as we take time to be able to learn more about our faith, as we take time to practice the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, these are what feeds us and keeps us connected so that we can have life and life in abundance. And therefore we recognize how it is that we must live more and more a disciplined spiritual life day by day if we want to be able to stay connected to God and to be able to bear fruit in abundance. And as we nurture our spiritual lives, then we are more and more able to abide in God and God to abide in us. And when we are able to abide in God, then we experience that sense of peace, that sense of joy, that sense of fulfillment, because we recognize that we are made for God and that we are called to be his saints and that we are called to live lives of holiness day by day. And our saintliness and our holiness can only be achieved when we stay connected to him. But as we stay connected to him, then we will recognize, as Jesus speaks about in the gospel, of how it then will be necessary at times that we too experience that sense of pruning in our lives. Just as the gardener needs to prune the branches in order to take away what is dead and what is barren, to be able to make room for new growth, the same is true in our spiritual lives. That as we draw closer to the life-giving Spirit of God, then we too will recognize how it is that we need to be pruned, that we need to let go of what is old and dead. We need to let go of what is preventing us from living healthy and holy lives. And therefore, the second task in the spiritual life is that of pruning ourselves so that we can become more and more who God calls us to be. And what is it that we need to prune in our lives? Perhaps for some of us, the pruning that we need to happen is being able to let go of unhealthy relationships of the past or the present. Perhaps for others of us, the pruning that we need to do is let go of past hurts and bitternesses and resentments towards others. Maybe for others of us, the pruning that we need to do is being able to forgive ourselves for things that we have done in the past. Still, for others of us, perhaps the pruning that we need to do in the present is breaking free from some type of addictive behavior or sinful pattern in our own lives. These are all areas in which we need to prune ourselves regularly so that we can live more healthy and holy lives. And as we live more healthy and holy lives, then we are able to better abide in God and allow ourselves then to be his witnesses and his disciples. But the task of pruning at first can seem very daunting to us. We think, how is it that I can do this? It seems almost at times impossible of how it is that I can break free from this or that. But as Jesus reminds us in the gospel tonight, that in fact God the Father is the master pruner, that it is not a work or task that we have to do alone or by ourselves, But in fact, what we simply need to do is give God the permission to do the work, to do the healing, to do the transforming in our lives. And then we simply need to cooperate with him day by day. Just as Max and Ted gave to the inmates the skills that they needed in order to be able to find life outside of the jail, so too do we need to cooperate with God so that we can experience the freedom that he has in store for us as his disciples. And so the challenge and the invitation that is placed before us today and every day is how it is that we want to live our lives. Do we desire to stay connected to God moment by moment, day by day, allowing him to be the source and the summit of our lives? And if so, how is it that we are using the time that he has given to us to be able to draw closer to him so that we can grow in that relationship and that intimacy with him? And if we allow ourselves to grow in that intimacy and relationship with him, then will we also give him that permission to begin the pruning that is necessary in those areas of our life so that we can live more healthily and wholly. This is the challenge and the invitation that is placed before us, to stay connected to the true vine and allow ourselves to be life-giving branches. As Jesus reminds us at the end of the gospel tonight, "My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples." To become his disciples means that we must draw closer to him day by day. To be his disciples means that we have to prune out those things that are unhealthy and holy. And as we draw closer to him, as we prune those areas, then our lives can be fruitful and can be faithful to him. And in doing so, we give glory to God. And so perhaps this week, as we take some time to step back, we can assess how it is our lives are connected to that true vine. Where is it perhaps that we need to add in our spiritual discipline to remain connected to him? What is it that we need to ask him to prune from us so that we can become more his faithful, fruitful, intentional disciples?